You can be doing something completely ordinary, walking down the street, sitting in a room with other people, opening your phone or posting a simple comment, and there's this quiet background sensation that you are being observed, not stared at, not followed, but noticed, as if your behavior, your posture, your tone, or your timing is somehow visible and being evaluated. And because this feeling is so constant, most people never question it. They assume it reflects reality, that others really are paying attention, tracking mistakes, forming opinions. But what's actually happening has very little to do with other people and almost everything to do with how your brain is wired. Your brain did not evolve in a world where anonymity was normal. For most of human history, being seen by others mattered in a very real, physical way. Acceptance meant protection. Rejection meant danger. Your survival depended on staying inside the group, understanding your status, and adjusting your behavior to avoid exclusion. Because of that, the human brain developed extremely sensitive social monitoring systems. These systems track how you are perceived, whether you are accepted, and whether you are at risk of being pushed out. That sensitivity never disappeared. The environment changed, but the wiring stayed the same. Today, that same system is still running. Even though the stakes are completely different, your brain still treats social attention as a potential threat signal. Being noticed feels risky. Being judged feels dangerous. Even neutral situations can trigger self-awareness because the brain is constantly scanning for signs of evaluation. This is not paranoia. It's outdated survival software doing its job in the wrong context. Psychologists describe one part of this as the spotlight effect. It's the tendency to overestimate how much other people notice you. From your perspective, your thoughts, emotions, and actions are experienced in full detail. Every hesitation feels loud. Every awkward moment feels obvious. Every mistake feels permanent. But other people don't experience you that way. They don't have access to your internal world. They are mostly occupied with their own thoughts, their own self-monitoring, their own concerns. The problem is that your brain assumes your internal intensity is visible externally. It projects your self-awareness outward and interprets it as attention from others. This is why small things feel disproportionately big. You remember something you said hours later and replay it in your head, assuming others must still be thinking about it too. You become hyper-aware of how you're sitting, how you're standing, how you're speaking, because your brain treats these details as socially relevant data. But in reality, most of that information never registers for anyone else. The spotlight feels real because the sensation is real, even if the situation isn't. There's also a predictive element involved. Your brain is constantly trying to anticipate how people will respond to you. This helps you navigate social interactions smoothly, but it can easily become distorted. When feedback is unclear, when faces are neutral, when responses are delayed, the brain fills in the gaps. Silence becomes judgment. Neutrality becomes disapproval. Ambiguity becomes rejection. The brain prefers a negative interpretation over uncertainty because uncertainty feels unsafe. A bad explanation is often more comfortable than no explanation at all. This is why the feeling intensifies in situations where evaluation is possible but not explicit. Walking into a room, speaking in a group, sitting quietly while others talk, posting something online and waiting for a response. These moments activate your social prediction systems. Your brain starts asking questions it cannot answer clearly, and instead of leaving them open, it answers them pessimistically. You feel watched not because people are watching, but because your brain is running threat simulations without enough information to shut them down. Modern environments amplify this dramatically. We now live in a world where visibility is constant. Profiles, metrics, views, likes, comments, reactions. Even when you're not actively posting, your brain knows that observation is possible. That knowledge alone is enough to keep the monitoring system active. You don't need actual judgment for the stress response to engage. The potential for judgment is enough, and once that system is on, it subtly shapes your behavior. You become more careful, more edited. You choose words that feel safer rather than truer. You hesitate before acting naturally. You start seeing yourself through an imagined external lens, wondering how this moment looks instead of how it feels. Over time, this creates a split in attention. One part of you is living the experience, another part is watching yourself live it, and that second part is almost never relaxed. Psychologists call this self-objectification. Instead of experiencing yourself from the inside, you experience yourself as an object being observed. Your attention turns inward, but not in a reflective way, in an evaluative way. Am I doing this right? Do I look normal? Did that sound strange? This kind of attention is exhausting because it never leads to resolution. There is no final answer that tells the brain it can stop monitoring, so the system stays on, quietly draining energy. What makes this especially difficult is that the sensation doesn't disappear when you're alone. The internal audience remains. You replay conversations. You imagine how you were perceived. You rehearse future interactions in advance. Your brain treats imagined evaluation almost the same as real evaluation. The same neural networks activate, so the stress response continues long after the situation ends. This is why people often feel socially drained even when nothing overtly stressful happened. Another important factor is how stable your sense of self feels. When you feel grounded in who you are, social attention carries less weight. Feedback is information, not a threat. But when your identity feels uncertain, your brain relies more heavily on external cues to define you. Approval feels stabilizing. Disapproval feels destabilizing. In that state, being watched feels dangerous because it carries the power to confirm or undermine your sense of self. Your brain is also very bad at estimating probabilities in social situations. It doesn't calculate how likely it is that someone is paying attention to you. It operates on relevance. You are highly relevant to yourself, so the brain assumes you are relevant to others. This is why minor imperfections feel unforgettable. You notice them vividly, so your brain assumes they must be memorable. In reality, most people forget quickly, if they notice at all, but your nervous system doesn't operate on statistics. It operates on perceived threat. Importantly, this experience is not limited to anxious or insecure people. Almost everyone feels it to some degree. The difference is how much authority the feeling has. For some, it's a passing sensation that doesn't affect behavior. For others, it becomes the lens through which they make decisions. They avoid certain actions, they limit expression, they choose safety over authenticity. Life slowly becomes a performance instead of an experience. And the most important thing to understand is this: the feeling that everyone is watching you is not evidence that you are failing socially. It is evidence that your social survival system is operating at full sensitivity in a world that constantly triggers it. Your brain is applying ancient rules to modern conditions. It is trying to protect you using mechanisms that no longer match the environment. And until you understand that, the feeling will continue to feel personal, even though it isn't. To understand why this feeling becomes overwhelming for some people and barely noticeable for others, you have to look at how the social monitoring system is calibrated over time. Your brain doesn't decide in adulthood how alert it should be to social evaluation. That setting is shaped early through repeated experiences of being seen, corrected, ignored, praised, or shamed. If attention in your early environment felt unpredictable or conditional, your nervous system learned that being watched carried risk. Not dramatic danger, but emotional consequence. Being noticed meant something could go wrong. For people who grew up in environments where mistakes were highlighted, emotions were dismissed, or approval felt inconsistent, the brain learned to stay vigilant. It learned that attention equals evaluation, and evaluation equals potential harm. Over time, this vigilance becomes automatic. You don't consciously decide to monitor yourself. Your body does it for you. The system becomes so familiar that it feels like intuition, when in reality it's conditioning. This is also why highly perceptive or emotionally sensitive people tend to feel this sensation more strongly. If you naturally pick up on subtle cues, tone shifts, facial expressions, pauses, your brain has more data to work with. And when the brain has more data, it generates more predictions. You're not imagining judgment. You're over-interpreting ambiguous signals because your system is trained to do so. The problem isn't sensitivity itself. It's that sensitivity without safety turns into constant self-surveillance. Modern digital environments reinforce this conditioning in a powerful way. Social platforms don't just allow observation, they quantify it. Numbers replace nuance. Likes, views, impressions, engagement, these metrics train the brain to associate visibility with value and invisibility with irrelevance. Even if you tell yourself you don't care, your nervous system registers the data. It learns that being seen has consequences, and it keeps the monitoring system on high alert. Over time, this creates a distorted feedback loop. You start anticipating evaluation before it happens. You adjust behavior in advance. You hesitate to express opinions. You wait for cues before acting. The brain becomes more focused on managing perception than engaging with reality. And because this management never feels complete, the tension never resolves. You're always slightly ahead of yourself, watching yourself from the outside. What's important to understand is that this constant self-monitoring doesn't make you more socially successful in the long run. It often does the opposite. When attention is split between being present and managing how you're perceived, presence suffers. Conversations feel flatter. Responses feel delayed. You become less spontaneous, less grounded. Ironically, the attempt to avoid judgment makes interactions feel less natural, which reinforces the belief that you're being evaluated negatively. There's also a cost to identity. When you live under the internal assumption that you're being watched, your sense of self slowly shifts outward. You start defining yourself based on how you appear, rather than how you feel or what you value. Over time, this erodes internal authority. Decisions feel less intuitive. Confidence becomes conditional. You feel real only when you're alone and performative when you're around others. That split is exhausting. So how does this system actually calm down? Not through forcing confidence and not through pretending you don't care. Your brain doesn't respond to slogans. It responds to evidence. The monitoring system relaxes only when it learns repeatedly that being seen does not equal danger. That learning happens in small, specific ways. It happens when you allow yourself to be slightly imperfect and notice that nothing catastrophic follows. When you speak without rehearsing every word and the world doesn't collapse. When you let a moment pass without correcting yourself and the connection remains intact. These experiences retrain the nervous system. They show it that the prediction of threat was inaccurate. Another critical shift is reclaiming attention from the imagined audience back into the body. Self-monitoring pulls attention upward into thoughts about how you're being perceived. Grounding pulls attention downward into physical sensation, breathing, posture, movement. When attention returns to the body, the nervous system exits prediction mode and re-enters experience mode. You are no longer watching yourself exist. You are existing. It also helps to recognize when the feeling is about uncertainty rather than judgment. Most people are not evaluating you. They are uncertain, distracted, preoccupied, or self-conscious themselves. But the brain interprets uncertainty as threat unless proven otherwise. Learning to tolerate ambiguity without filling it with negative assumptions is a skill, not a mindset. It develops slowly through repeated exposure and non-reactivity. Another important piece is reducing environments that constantly trigger evaluation. This doesn't mean isolation. It means balance. Spending time in spaces where performance doesn't matter, where nothing is being measured, where you're valued for presence rather than output. These environments give your nervous system a reference point. They remind it what safety feels like, so it can recognize when vigilance is unnecessary. Over time, something subtle begins to change. The sensation of being watched doesn't disappear entirely, but it loses its authority. It becomes background noise rather than a command. You notice it without obeying it. You act without waiting for permission. You speak without monitoring every reaction. The internal audience slowly quiets, not because you defeated it, but because it no longer needs to shout. And that's the final truth. Your brain doesn't think everyone is watching you because you're doing something wrong. It thinks everyone is watching you because it learned at some point that attention was dangerous. When that belief is updated through lived experience, the system recalibrates, not into indifference, but into balance. You stop living as an object under observation and return to living as a person inside your own life. Presence replaces performance. Experience replaces evaluation. And the world feels lighter, not because people stopped watching, but because your brain stopped assuming they were.